Hey, computational thinking. In this video, we're going to be looking at another example of using requests and BeautifulSoup to pull some data from the web. You're going to find the starter file for this project under the worst video games, which is within the web scraping heading on Replit Teams. For this project, we're actually going to be working on this for a little bit, so there's going to be 2 lessons on this particular project. And what we're going to be doing is from this link, which you can copy and paste this URL into your browser, there is a list on Wikipedia of the worst video games, or the list of video games notable for negative reception. And what we're going to be trying to do is isolate the dates and decades, potentially, the dates for, excuse me, the years, not the dates, the years, for each game and the title of the game that is on this sort of worst video games ever list. And you can see that it includes games from the 1980s all the way up until the 2020s. Okay? We're going to identify a couple of ways we can pull this data, and we're going to be talking about how we can help ourselves when we get stuck and we don't know what to do next with libraries like BeautifulSoup. So, I want to briefly look at the instructions with you. One thing I want to focus on, or actually I don't want to look at this, I want to look at this guy right here. Okay, so what I want to focus on with you is this idea of process. And the reason I want to focus on this is because with this process, you can ultimately work with any web data you find, no matter where you find it. So the process goes like this, right? The first thing that we do no matter what is we're going to use requests and BeautifulSoup to get the HTML soup made from the wiki page. Then we're going to go back to the page and we're going to identify the elements of interest using the inspection tool. That's that little mouse and square that I've shown you before, this guy right up here. And then once we have the elements of interest, we're going to use BeautifulSoup to isolate those elements, and then we'll parse the data in whatever way we want using Python. So these first 2 steps are all about the web page itself, really. And then these steps, 3 and 4, are really about our Python program. And we're going to rely on our fundamental Python programming knowledge to complete these steps. Okay, let's get started. So the very first thing that we need to do is we need to import requests. And we need it from BS4, import BeautifulSoup. Okay, we're going to get our response from a URL, which is this guy right here. I'm actually going to go ahead and move him down. We typically want our import statements to be at the very top of any Python file. I'll move this URL up a little bit, move this down. Okay, so we're going to go out there and get our website. We can run our code and make sure that it is working. We can go ahead and install all of our dependencies. And we can check resp. We got response 200, meaning we successfully got the website. And so now we will move on to getting the soup made. Typically, I use the soup variable for my BeautifulSoup instance. And what you need to recall at this point is what BeautifulSoup is, right? BeautifulSoup, as we discussed last week when we looked at classes, BeautifulSoup is an instance of the BeautifulSoup class. Okay? And what does this class need in order to create itself? It needs resp.text. That's the text from the response. Looks like that, all that crazy HTML. And then BeautifulSoup also needs to know, hey, what am I supposed to do with that HTML? Or excuse me, what am I supposed to do with that text? I'm going to parse it as HTML using the HTML parser. Remember, this word parse just means to analyze, to pick out certain things about a string or text that we see. And that's why we're using the HTML parser right there. Okay. Now, from this point, we probably are a little bit stuck, like we don't know exactly what we want from the website. And so we're going to go back over to the website. We're going to use our inspection tool, F12, or right-click inspect element. Okay. And so now the challenge is to figure out where is best to get this data from. So there's actually two places we can pull this data from. One is this table of contents, which we can clearly see. Another is this set of data, which is, this also has all the titles. We can see it has the decades sorted in this way. It basically mirrors the table of contents. We can keep scrolling down and see that there's more. And it ends down in the 2020s. Went too far there. Yeah, so 2020s, we got Warcraft 3 and Cyberpunk as the worst games. Poor Cyberpunk. They really botched that one. Alright, so anyway, we'll come back up here. Now, so with those two strategies, I'm going to show you just the one for right now. I think that the table of contents strategy is the way to go. This is the table of contents, and I'm going to call it the table of contents strategy. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my inspection tool. I'm going to look for the element which contains everything I want, basically, which is this right here. When I mouse over this, I'm going to see, like I see this highlighted where I clicked on this with my inspection tool. I'm going to go ahead and open this little drop down and kind of see what all is available to me over here. I'm going to make this a little closer. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to see, okay, all right, ooh, now that looks good. That seems to be the element containing lots of the data I'm interested in. So if I click on it, I see all these drop downs here. So what is a UL, what is an LI? Well, a UL is an unordered list, basically a list that where the number isn't particularly relevant, and I know that that doesn't make sense because there's lots of numbers over here, but the way Wikipedia is using this is a little different than how we might normally see it. So don't stress too much about that, just know that that's a list of stuff, and then within that unordered list, we've got lots of list items. That's the LI. So within the unordered list, we've got lots of list items. And so now we can open these up and we can see that within every list item, there's actually another unordered list. And then within that, we've got all these list items, right? And it just so happens that these contain the titles of the games. Okay, now this is all pretty relevant so far to what we need. And so perhaps the right way to go about this is to just pull out this whole table of contents and see where that sort of takes us. So we're going to pull out the first and only table of contents from this webpage. In order to do that, I'm going to come over here and I'll type in talk. That's going to be my variable to hold the table of contents. And I'm going to say soup. What do I want to do with my beautiful soup? I want to find the talk. Okay. So now we'll run our code. We'll see what we get with this talk. So we didn't find anything with talk, right? What the heck? I mean, there's definitely something called talk here. Trouble is that this isn't actually a talk or table of contents element, it's a div. And so knowing that this is a div and that it has these IDs and classes of talk, that might not be super helpful right now because we don't know what we can do with BeautifulSoup in order to access that. So this is kind of like, all right, well, I've hit a stopping point. I don't know what to do. How do I get this div out with this particular content in it? And the answer to that question is sort of multifaceted, okay? Because at some point, you are going to work on your own project. And you will be the one that has to go and look this up. I won't be able to tell you exactly what you need for your exact project because you're going to work on a web page of your own. And so the answer to that question is we need to look at some sort of resource or authoritative source on what we can do with BeautifulSoup. And the answer to what that is the BeautifulSoup documentation. When I'm working with external libraries like BeautifulSoup, one of the most important things that I need to know about is the documentation. And so, oops, BeautifulSoup documentation, okay? And so if I want to Google for a particular documentation about an external library, I'm just going to Google BeautifulSoup documentation or request documentation, whatever it might be. Typically, it's going to be the very first result, which it is right over here. So it's got the BeautifulSoup 4.9.0 documentation. That's the one we want. And we can see immediately that this is a ton of text. Now, this is an intimidating wall of text. It's intimidating because there's lots of words on here we might not know. It just seems like a lot of information. It's probably the most text we've seen, perhaps, as students in computer science or in any class. We've never been this overwhelmed by the sheer amount of content. Okay? So the first thing to do is to let that intimidation kind of wash over you and just accept it and be prepared to move on, because the truth of the matter is you can read this and understand it if you simply take the time to do it. Okay? It is tough because there's a lot of things in here that may seem unfamiliar, but the only way to get familiar with it is to look at it. Okay? And the other good news, I guess, that we should talk about is that you don't have to read all of this, right? You don't have to go through here and be an expert on Beautiful Soup from this documentation in order to continue with your project. So what we need to do is we need to see if we can figure out like how to do exactly what we want to do. So we can look for some specific stuff. And what I want to look for is like, how would I use the find method to pull out a particular div with like a certain kind of ID? And I can see that there are lots of options and information on different methods within the Beautiful Soup library. If I just look over here, and I'll show you one more time. If I look over here at this little table of contents on the left. So an example right here, I see find all. These are things that I've used before maybe. And so I'm going to look for find all here. And I notice that if I use find all, but I type in an ID, that's one thing to notice. So if I go back and look at like my HTML here, this has an ID. So maybe I can do like find all where the ID is talk. Let's try that. Okay, so we just got that entire table of contents, and all we had to do was go and look at the Beautiful Soup documentation. We didn't have to read it all. We just sort of looked for something that we recognized, right? We sort of skimmed, we went to find all, we went to find, and we saw like, hey, oh, here's something where I can just type in the ID. That seems relevant to what I'm working on because I noticed that this thing has an ID of talk. And so we took advantage of that. And now we've got this big list of list items. And if we look closely, we can see that the names are actually in there. And so let's do this next. Anytime I get a big list of stuff in Beautiful Soup, typically what I'm going to do next is I'm going to type something like this. I'm going to do for thing, right? Whatever it might be, in talk print thing. And then a lot of times I'm interested in the text, so I'm going to say thing.text. And what do you know? So now we've got everything from the table of contents down into Python, and we'll be able to manipulate it by using some Python techniques, and we'll discuss that in the next video. Okay, so once you're at this point, you can pause. Maybe you can try to experiment on your own on how you would pull these titles out of here. I would encourage you to do that, but we'll cover that in the next video.